most passerines feed their chicks caterpillars. And the caterpillars are most abundant right after the deciduous leaves have opened up, right after the new foliage on the conifers has emerged. And if you get out of sync with that, you can't feed your babies. And that's what happened to the pied flycatchers. Hasn't happened here yet, but if we keep going along this path, it's going to. So, I've depressed you all, right? So I want to tell you, as I wrap things up here, I want to end with some simple things that you can do in your day-to-day lives that will help migratory birds. And I'm not talking about moving to Elkhorn Mountains and making a shack out of bark and eating twigs for the rest of your life. One of the most important things that you can do is join, support, and advocate for organizations like Montana Audubon that are advocating for migratory bird conservation. I assume you've all done that. So another thing that you can do is landscape with nature in mind. And what I mean by that is instead of planting, whether you've got a little place in town or a big place out in the country somewhere, instead of planting a lot of exotic plants from other parts of the world that have no ecological connection to Montana, plant native species. They're pre-adapted to the climate, they're pre-adapted to the diseases and the pests, they're pretty much bulletproof. Every time you plant one of these species, you are knitting together broken ecological connections. You are creating an oasis for birds in your backyard or on your property. And these are just random pictures from our backyard in Pennsylvania. You're not trading anything in terms of beauty. And here's the thing: it's an invitation. It's permission to be a lazy gardener, right? I am the poster child for lazy gardening. I just let my flower beds fight out a Darwinian struggle for survival. The insects that eat these plants are not pests, they are bird food. And in the fall, instead of trimming everything back and let it neat, just let that riotous stuff out there because all of the seeds in there are bird food as well. And plant native berry-producing plants. And people, it drives me nuts. People say, I like the plants, I want to plant something for birds in my backyard, something that's going to hold its berries through the winter. No. The shrubs that hold their berries through the winter are the ones that have berries that are the nutritional equivalent of library paste. You want to plant something like native viburnums and native dogwoods when the birds will eat the berries 3 nanoseconds after they're ripe, because these are berries, they're fruit that are rich in fats, rich in lipids that will allow these birds to put on the weight that they need to migrate south. And while you're creating this bird oasis in your backyard, please be organic about it. You don't want to attract the birds to your property and then soak it full of chemicals that are going to damage them. And if you're going to be organic in your backyard, I would ask you to buy organic when you go to the grocery store. Because, say amen, sister. Yes. I feel like I'm at a tent revival here. I may not go home. I don't know. Did you see about a year and a half ago, Stanford University released a study where they looked at the nutritional value, comparative nutritional value of organic versus inorganic or non-organic food, inorganic food. And they concluded that there was no nutritional benefit to eating organic, and I thought, way to miss the point. A ridiculous number of birds spend a significant amount of time either in migration or on their wintering grounds in agricultural landscapes. And so it's better for the environment, it's better for us, and it's way better for the birds if we try to use the market to increase the amount of organics out there. Here's a really simple one. If you have a cat, keep it inside. This seems so simple. They call them house cats for a reason. The evidence is really building up that there's a whole lot of ways that we as humans kill birds inadvertently. From window strikes, cars, and those are tough nuts to crack. This is a simple one. Keep cats inside. Cats, we now know from research by Pete Mara and the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center that cats kill more birds than any other anthropogenic human-related cause. They kill more birds than windows, they kill more birds than lighted skyscrapers, than cars, and it's easy. And if your community is trying to start a trap, neuter, and release project, fight it tooth and nail. TNR, I'm happy to talk to you afterwards. But unfortunately, this is a really emotionally polarized subject, and we birders have a tendency to toss around terms like cat crazies, and cat aficionados say exactly the same thing about us. We need to find some common ground on this because this is a problem that we ought to be able to solve. Now, here, this is going to seem like a weirdly specific one because we're all good conservationists, we all recycle, we all buy recycled products, but I want you specifically to use recycled paper because most of the paper that we use in the United States comes out of the boreal forest of Canada, which at 1.5 billion acres is the largest intact forest left on the planet. Bigger than the Brazilian Amazon, bigger than the Congo. And it is a bird factory of international significance. Whether we're talking about common loons or pectoral sandpipers or savanna sparrows or surf scoters or whooping cranes, 220 species of birds, hundreds of millions of individuals come pouring out of the boreal forest every year, and we are cutting it down to make toilet paper and facial tissue and catalog pages. But there's wonderful things happening in the boreal forests of Canada. The biggest conservation victory in the history of conservation victories is taking shape in the boreal forest of Canada, where a consortium of environmental organizations and nonprofits, First Nations tribes, some of the biggest extractive industry leaders in Canada, and provincial and federal governments have come together to set aside potentially half of the boreal forest in protected conservation zones. There's a campaign called Boreal Birds Need Half by the Boreal Conservation Initiative, the Boreal Songbird Initiative. But you know, the governments of Quebec and Ontario between them have set aside 212 million acres in conservation. The Northwest Territories has designated 75% of its land area for conservation. It's trying to backpedal a little on that, so we're holding their feet to the fire. But and probably because we're Americans and we pay no attention to Canada, you've probably not heard anything about this, but this is a big deal. And in the areas that will be developed, the large forest products producers have pledged to do so under Forest Stewardship Council sustainability standards. So look for that recycled paper symbol on there. Every time you do that, you're helping bay-breasted warblers and surf scoters and all the other good stuff coming out of the boreal. So, and finally, I would encourage you to drink more. And before you go rushing to the bar, let me just suggest that you drink more coffee. And this is another one of those things that just seems not terribly intuitive. The connection between birds and coffee doesn't make a whole lot of sense to a lot of people. But if I show you these three pictures, and I ask you to pick out the pictures that show a crop under cultivation, well, I mean, obviously, it's the one in the upper right-hand corner there where everything's planted in nice, neat lines, right? Except that all of these are pictures of coffee under cultivation. The difference is the other two pictures show coffee the way coffee was traditionally raised in Latin America and the Caribbean, in the shade of an existing, intact, biodiverse, functioning forest. That's the way we grew coffee for years, and it was incredibly important for birds because the number of migratory birds, neotrop migrant songbirds primarily, that use traditional shade coffee plantations boggles the mind. The problem is we're losing those shade coffee plantations. Increasingly, the coffee that we buy up here in the United States is coming from sun coffee plantations where they took this rich biodiverse forest with a few coffee shrubs growing in the shade and bulldozed it and planted sun-tolerant coffee shrubs in long lines, soaked it with herbicide, soaked it with chemicals, soaked it with fungicide, soaked it with fertilizer. It's the only way you can really get any kind of yield out of the stuff. And they raise really crappy coffee that way. It's hard to overstate the importance of shade coffee for migratory songbirds, whether we're talking about western tanagers or blue-headed vireos, chestnut-sided warblers, Baltimore orioles, Bullock's orioles. Hundreds of species of migratory birds either use shade coffee plantations as stopover habitat during their migration or as their primary wintering habitat when they're in Latin America. We've lost about 40% of the shade coffee plantations in Latin America, and we're the reason for that here in the United States. We drink a third of the world's coffee supply, and we like cheap coffee. Except there is no such thing as cheap coffee. There's inexpensive coffee, but the price is paid by the birds who are losing their habitat. So the bad news is we drink a third of the world's coffee and we're driving this trend. But we drink a third of the world's coffee, which means if we buy the right coffee, we can turn things around for migratory birds. How many coffee drinkers do we have here? Okay, how many of you would not want to face the day without coffee? I'm married to one of you people. So you have a choice. Unfortunately, this is one of those situations where there's no in-between. You're either buying coffee that saves bird habitat or you're buying coffee that destroys bird habitat. If you buy it in a can at the supermarket, it's destroying bird habitat. Most of the specialty coffee that you buy is not necessarily good for birds. You want to buy certified shade coffee. There are a bunch of certification programs out there. The Rainforest Alliance has one. They have just watered it down to the point of insignificance, to be quite honest with you, to be brutally honest with you. The one I want you to look for is this one. It's the bird-friendly coffee certification from the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center at the Smithsonian Institution. This is the gold standard of shade coffee certifications. The certification is done by independent third parties in Latin America. There is a raft of criteria from the complexity of overstory. It must all be native species to stream buffers. It requires USDA organic certification right off the top. If you buy this kind of coffee, and there are many roasters, like here in the West, Cafe Ibis sells a lot of bird-friendly coffee. This isn't a particular roaster. This isn't a particular company. It's a particular certification. Go to the Smithsonian's Migratory Birds website. There's a little zip code finder in there. You can plug in your zip code, find out if there's somebody local that sells it. And there's a bunch of places like Cafe Ibis, like Birds and Beans in the East, like Golden Valley, that sell this stuff online. Every time you buy this kind of coffee, you are directly saving bird habitat. It's by far the most rigorous certification system. There's a raft of peer-reviewed science to show that these kind of coffee farms are almost as good as untouched forest. This is a picture I took in northern Nicaragua 2 winters ago. Everything you see in that picture to the horizon is a bird-friendly certified coffee farm. That's what a bird-friendly landscape looks like. In 30 years of birding in Latin America, I have never seen so many neotropical migrant songbirds as I did in the highlands of northern Nicaragua. There's a 400 farm cooperative in this area. All of their coffee is bird-friendly certified. And when you look at this area from space on Google Earth, it's an island of green surrounded by degraded cattle pastures and sun coffee. We're keeping the birds alive there by buying this coffee. I love this quote from my good friend Bridget Stutchberry at York University, whose wonderful book, The Silence of the Songbirds, I would commend to all of you. She talks about the ghosts in the steam rising from your cup of coffee, and I'm actually not sure how Bridget means this. If you're talking about coffee that, if it's sun coffee, it's literally the ghosts of the warblers and the thrushes that used to live on that land and no longer do. I mean, if you drink coffee, you're going to drink coffee, so you might as well drink the good stuff. You might as well buy the stuff that's going to help the birds, because the birds are already doing everything that they can. Every year, they take everything that they are, their entire genetic legacy stretching back millions of generations, and risk it on another flight south, on another leap of faith, this act of faith that's buried deep in their bones, deep in their genes. They're already doing all that they can. The rest of it is up to us. So go forth and save birds. Folks, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. It has been a real pleasure.